you for coming. And my name is Brooke. Now, what is my last name? It depends on where I am, because when I came to Mexico, I had used my husband's last name, but when I got my citizenship, they made me take my maiden name. So my book, House of Blue Water, I wrote in my married name, Gazer. But most of you who know me probably know me as husband, because I started using my Mexican name when I got married. Oh, thank you. Is that better? Can you hear me now?
Oh, there we go.
Yes, okay. House of Blue Water, as you imagine, is about moving to Mexico, building and running a bed and breakfast. It's also about change, because how we deal with crisis and change defines how we live our lives. In 1996, the company I worked for announced that it was going to have its fourth round of downsizing. As you can imagine, this was getting pretty tedious, and my first reaction was, God, just take me and get it over with. But then I realized what it would be like to be 45 and unemployed, and I was reeling about that when I walked into the restaurant, because I'd been planning to meet my husband for lunch that day. There was somebody he wanted to introduce me to. So when I entered and sat down, Rick didn't notice that I was kind of upset. He just said, Brooke, this is Paul. Paul and his wife are going back to Thailand in about a month. They're going to open a guest house there. And I went, wow, that's fantastic. I want to hear everything you're doing, because we can do the same thing next year. Well, Rick never heard this before, so he kind of dropped his coffee cup on the table. And he says, Brooke, is there something you forgot to mention? And yes, there was something I'd forgotten to mention 15 years earlier. We had been in a guest house in San Miguel that was run by a couple of Americans. And I remember sitting in this guest house and thinking, wow, these people have such a nice life. I'd like to do that myself sometimes. It was such a bizarre idea. It was really a fantasy. I took it out and played with it from time to time, but I never shared it with anybody, not even with Rick. So when I blurted this out, he wasn't really that interested. He was actually going through his own crisis, because the building that he was renting for his business was canceling his lease, and he was kind of at sixes and sevens as to what he was going to do. But I'm a dreamer. My husband is more of a dollars and cents kind of guy, and he really didn't think we could earn a living running a bed and breakfast. Well, 2 weeks before the cut, or after the cut came, we had planned a trip to Thailand. We'd been planning this trip for over a year, and we had the tickets. But my father thought the most irresponsible thing we could do would be to take a vacation when we were unemployed. He said, Brooke, you go out there and you get a job. Forget the vacation. But the tickets were paid for, and the temperature was plummeting to about minus 20 Celsius, which is about -4 Fahrenheit. And so instead of canceling our vacation, we extended it to 10 weeks. When else were we going to have that time to travel? I'm not a sun worshiper, but about 4 or 5 weeks into the vacation, I remember lying on a beach south of Bangkok, and I could feel the heat radiating onto my back from the sun, from the sand, looking out at this beautiful turquoise water sparkling in the sun, and thinking what our life could possibly be like if we made some radical changes. And I brought the subject up again about running a bed and breakfast to my husband. And at that point, he was a little bit more receptive to the idea. He wasn't quite ready to change his life. But the longer we spent in Thailand, the more we kept asking ourselves, why are we working so hard? We don't have a mortgage, we don't have children.
Can you
still hear me?
No, she unplugged.
Thank you, Mint. That was quite an entrance. There, can you hear me now? So we kept asking ourselves, why are we working so hard? And why are we living in deep freeze half our life? So by the time we got back to Calgary, Rick was ready to present a compromise. He said, why don't we do it here in Calgary and see how it goes? And that was a reasonable suggestion, so I agreed. The idea was that I'd go back to work because I could get a salary job, and Rick would be the host of our bed and breakfast. But my husband had never really shown much interest in doing any housework or cooking. And I couldn't do this by myself and run have a full-time job that was pretty demanding. So I brought this up, and he said, Brooke, I've never got paid for it before. And after 15 years, my husband could actually surprise me. He could make a bathroom sparkle better than I ever could. We've got guests coming, I've cleaned everything up, don't mess it up. So after 2.5 years, our bed and breakfast in Calgary was a huge success. We had guests from 23 different countries, and we were really excited and ready to move on. Our friends were less excited. In fact, they were less than supportive. My father refused to discuss it. I had a colleague who said, Brooke, if you're having a midlife crisis, couldn't you start small? Like, maybe you could change your hair color? I was kind of hurt by this, all their pessimism. But in February, we sold our house, we handed over the keys, we got in the car, and we started driving south. We were living like gypsies. This was not a vacation, it was a research. And we were staying in budget hotels. I had sheets and pillows in the car. I had a deep dish frying pan, a whole kitchen in the backseat of the car, and I could plug the frying pan into the lighter. And we were just one step above camping. And we were looking at what we were going to do. We traveled the whole Pacific coast. We traveled 5,625,000 kilometers, or 3,500 miles. And I'll just show you, I'll try to show you. This was on a minute ago. Oh, down. Did we lose it?
No,
It's
Oh, good. Oh, good. So I'm going to try and show you a picture of where we were. Whoops. Oh, this was so easy when I tried it earlier. Yeah.
There's the map.
Yes, there's the map. Okay, so we started in Canada. We drove through the States pretty quickly. We crossed in Nogales and we went over to San Carlos. We weren't very interested there. We started sort of really looking at Mazatlan in Puerto Vallarta, Zihuatanejo, and then we went to Puerto Escondido. And at this point, we were starting to get a little bit worried about whether we would find what we were going to need. We probably could have done this trip in 6 weeks, but we were learning. We were learning about Mexican law, we were learning about property ownership, we were learning about building costs, and we were learning about what we needed to do to run a successful bed and breakfast. And in Puerto Escondido, I learned a very important lesson that made my blood run cold. We were on our way to bed one night, and I started to turn off the light, and I said, Rick, there's something stuck between the light switch and the wall. It's really ugly, and it's got really big legs, and it's not a spider. And he got out of bed, he whacked it with a shoe, died, and we went to sleep. The next morning we went out and we came back to the room. The room was clean, but that thing was still there. Rick went and got the manager, and the manager came and took it out. It was a scorpion about that big. And I thought, oh my God, when we have a bed and breakfast, that's going to be me having to do that. So when we got to Huatulco, things were looking very promising. Huatulco is very different than this coast. Well, the whole Pacific coast is different, but Huatulco has 22 miles of shoreline and 9 bays with 36 beautiful beaches that are all very sheltered. But it was also a different world. We'd been traveling through dusty towns and rustic roads, and all of a sudden there's all this pavement and palm trees and street lights and grass on the boulevards. And it was starting to look pretty nice. It started to look like a place, kind of place we wanted to live and the kind of place that we could attract visitors to. This is literally where the mountains meet the sea. And the third day that we were there, we went snorkeling at a beach called La Entrega. And as we donned our snorkels, went into the water, we just saw a kaleidoscope of color. And I was mesmerized. Rick tapped me on the shoulder and he pointed, and not far out in the water, there was a sea turtle. It was huge, it was like this big. And I don't know if you know, but sea turtles are an endangered species, and I've never seen one except in an aquarium, and this was amazing. We got out of the water, we decided that this was a sign from the universe, and that Huatulco was going to be our home. Now, we'd always intended to buy a property that was already built and maybe do some renovations, add a bathroom, a bedroom, fix the kitchen. We never intended to build. But Huatulco was so new. It was only 9 years old in 1999. There was nothing to buy, and we were going to have to start from scratch. So by the time we bought the land, hired an architect, approved the plans, got the plans approved, It was May of 2000. And we wanted to open our bed and breakfast by January of 2001. Everybody said this was mission impossible. You can't do a project like this in 8 months. But we'd been without income for 2 years, and we needed to start recouping our investment. We needed to get back to work. And we thought, if we don't get that winter season of 2001, it's going to be a year before we have any money, and we're going to be broke. So it nearly killed us, and Rick nearly killed the architect. But we moved in on December 20th. And by January of 2001, my family came and they helped me get a few details done before January 1st. Hanging pictures, hemming drapes. By January 1st, we had a single woman from Chicago and a honeymoon couple from Argentina. We were in business. So we opened a 6-room bed and breakfast in just 8 short months. The architect was horrible to deal with, as anybody who's ever built a place in Mexico will attest to. But he gave us a great design, and now I'm going to try and show you the video. Gosh, I think this is going to work. Agua Azul La Villa is Spanish for the Blue Water House. The bed and breakfast is located in a prestigious residential neighborhood a short distance from the center of town. The villa cascades down the side of a hill and overlooks Teconcito Cove, which is just 3 minutes from the villa. Playa Teconcito is a perfect beach for swimming. Every morning you will enjoy breakfast in the common area under a 30-foot domed palapa. All guest rooms have queen-size beds, air conditioning and fan, Mexican tiled bathrooms, and spacious palapa-shaded terraces with hammock and other seating. Each of the 6 guest rooms is on its own level, offering privacy to everyone. The 2-tiered pool is in a garden setting of lush tropical plants and flowers. We invite you to enjoy the intimate experience of Agua Azul La Villa Bed and Breakfast, and we look forward to meeting you soon.
Excuse me, is
Yes.
this how it looks now, or how it looked 2000, year 2000?
That was how it looked probably about 2006.
Okay, you
Yeah.
built it, you went there 2000, you built it,
Yeah.
and that's about 2006, once it's established.
Well, the garden was pretty established. It took about a year and a half to get the garden really established. And it still looks very much that way now. But the people that bought the villa made a few changes.
Okay, just to get it in
Yeah.
perspective.
Yeah. So, in 2001, Agua Azul La Villa translates to House of Blue Water, or Blue Water House. And we did that name because you could see blue water, as you could tell, from every room in the house. And because we wanted to name it sort of with an A, because back in 2001, everything was listed alphabetically. And it took us about another 2 years to fix things, to get things working properly, and to get the kind of Mexican detail that we needed to make the house really have its charm. Once we did that, we always planned to have a puppy, and so we got an 8-week-old golden retriever, and we named him Poncho. And everybody loved Poncho. I mean, who doesn't love a golden retriever puppy? One morning, I looked under the table, and there were 3 different people who had slid off their sandals and were rubbing Poncho's tummy with their feet. And Poncho was just laying, spread-eagled, in sheer bliss.
Donnie Evan.
Yeah. And we were actually enjoying the breakfast time too, because we really enjoyed the guests that we had. And there were days that sometimes we'd be still sitting there at noon, exchanging stories and talking, and sometimes we'd even at noon say, oh, it's time for lunch, you want to go for lunch? We learned a lot from our guests, and some things that we learned helped us out a lot. And by 2004, life was perfect, and we thought we had all of our ducks in order. Then something blew up the pond. My husband had been complaining about heartburn and fatigue and shortness of breath. And one morning, 2 o'clock in the morning, he got out of bed and collapsed. I called the doctor because I thought, well, maybe he has a concussion. And when the doctor arrived, he gave him something to put under his tongue. Was that nitroglycerin? No. What was it? Isorbitol. Well, Isorbitol is the same thing. Did he have a heart attack? I hope not. Well, I hope not too, but we wanted to do something about it. I tried to explain to him, because I had a background in pharmaceuticals, that we needed to get him to the hospital, he needed an ECG. If there was a heart attack, there were things that stopped the progression. He looked at me as if I'd grown horns. Brooke, I've given him all the medication he needs, he just needs to rest. And he left. And I didn't know how to access the hospital, and I tried once before, and I knew how difficult it was. So I sat up all night and watched my husband breathe, hoping that he wouldn't stop. The next day, I kind of sleepwalked through the day, looking after the puppy, looking after guests, looking after my husband. He wasn't getting better. The next day he was worse, so I took him to another doctor, and that doctor said he needs to go to Mexico City, he needs to see a cardiologist. Well, Mexico City is a city of 17 million people, and where do you start to look for a cardiologist? Then I remembered one of our guests had worked for the American Embassy, and he had told me that when he had surgery, they arranged a hospital stay at a hospital called ABC, American British Quadri. So that's where I took him. When I got him to Mexico City and we were getting off the plane, that's when I realized how deep a trouble I was in, because when I asked for a wheelchair, Rick didn't complain. When he got to the hospital, he had a blood pressure of 60/40, which is half the normal blood pressure. The doctor said he was in heart failure and that his heart had about 3 hours before it would have given out. Why did I wait so long? Well, I had a lot of responsibilities at home to look after, and denial is a very powerful force. So back in Huatulco, Rick did recover. It took about 3 weeks in Mexico City. He recovered, but he was tired and didn't get out of bed a lot for a while. I was exhausted, and I was really stressed out. But as you can see by that video, there was little Peconcito. It was a 3-minute walk from our villa, and it was the perfect escape. I could go down there and go for a swim, just sit and be and relax. One day I was reading a book, and I felt something watching me. And I looked up, and out in the water, not very far out, were 2 manta rays. And they were bobbing up and down in the water, and I could see their tummies were white with black spots. Now, manta rays are usually out deep in the water, they're jumping 20 or 30 feet, but these ones were just bobbing up and down and looking at me. And we connected. I could see their face, and I could tell they were as curious about me as I was about them. And that was just a magical moment. And those are the kind of moments that really made life worth living, in spite of everything else. Back at the villa, I was starting to worry about what would happen if this happened again. It was getting better, but we weren't out of the woods. And when he had the heart attack, it was June. That's our low season. And one of our neighbors came over and helped a little bit. The staff were really good about pitching and hitting. But I thought, what would I do if this happened in January or February when we have a full house and a revolving door? It was too much to ask anybody. And Rick and I started to talk about what all alternatives were. We really enjoyed this whole bed and breakfast lifestyle. It was a fabulous lifestyle. We weren't ready to give it up. So we thought maybe we could relocate and sell a villa. And in 2008, we bought a property in Merida. We could buy it, took most of our savings, but we could buy it. We couldn't afford to renovate it until we sold House of Blue Water. Well, while we were busy dealing with Rick's crisis of health and looking at property and making decisions, another crisis arose. A wealthy neighbor from Mexico City bought that little beach. He bought the property in front of it. We'd been told that there would never be any overnight accommodation, that we would always have access to that, and that all beaches in Mexico were public, and we took the word of the government and we didn't get it in writing. Well, a few neighbors got together and we tried to stop the project. And I learned a very valuable lesson about power and corruption. He wanted to build 36 condos on this little beach that was less than 100 meters across, roughly 300 feet. He wanted to build them 4 stories high. We were going to completely lose our view. We would have no access to that beach. I was just sick. So, being one of the few full-time residents in this neighborhood, because a lot of this neighborhood was vacation homes, I was kind of leading the forefront of this challenge. And because I'm an idiot, I was leading this challenge. And he made our life miserable, and we encountered several problems and a couple of legal issues. Now, when we bought our property, it had sidewalks, it had electrical, it had telephone, it had sewage, and it had water coming in. And our deed for Fonator said urban, residential, touristical. And we had a document from Fonator who sold it, that's a government organization that sold the land in this area, that said we complied with everything that we needed to comply with and that we could have our permiso. But Profepa showed up on our door with 6 people, and they put a tape across our door, not across the door, they put a tape on our building that said Closerado, and I had 3 days to get to Oaxaca and settle this. And he said, if you don't, we'll put a tape across your door and you won't be able to come in. So fortunately, I have a really good friend in Oaxaca, and I took it to her and she read it. The first thing Laura said was, wow, Brooke, this is serious, this is federal, we can't even bribe our way out of this. That was not my first thought to handle it. But she said, look, this person that we have to see, his father is a friend of my father's, and I'm going to call my father right now and see what we can do. And that's when I started to learn that in Mexico, relationships are everything. Nora was a busy person. She had cooking classes, her family had 2 bed and breakfasts, she did tours, and she dropped everything to help me through this labyrinth of legal stuff. She got me in to see the person I needed to see within an hour of arriving in his office. He got me in to see the delegate, and the delegate said, I'm really sorry about this. When this came across my desk, I really wasn't going to do anything about it, and I ignored it. But there was so much pressure put on me through Mexico City because somebody made this complaint that had to be dealt with. She couldn't tell me who made the complaint, but it didn't take rocket science to figure this out. And she said, just comply with everything you need to do. We're not going to bother you. I'm not going to watch to see if you're doing any business. Just go ahead with everything quietly and get it done. It took about a year, and it cost about $10,000. So I'm a slow learner, and I dropped this whole issue about the condo development, and it went up. It was a very valuable lesson, and people ask me at the end of the day if I regretted moving to Mexico, and I can answer absolutely not. Power and corruption exist everywhere, and the difference is that had we lived in Canada, we simply couldn't afford to have bought a place in the neighborhood that we bought in, so we never would have kind of run into this kind of challenge. But if we lived in Canada, lived in this kind of area, and somebody with a lot of power and money wanted to build in front of us, we probably couldn't have stopped that either. So I've talked about a couple of negative things because they say in journalism, what bleeds leads. But there are also a lot of really positive things that happen. And sometimes even a negative can turn into a positive because although we lost access to that little beach, and even while they were building with all the noise and construction, nobody wanted to go down there. We just had to look a little further, and we found that go up the top of the hill and through the forest, there was an incredible beach. It was over a kilometer long. You could walk it for 15 minutes, and it was just a beautiful beach. It wasn't always a swimming beach, just because it was such an open beach, there was more surf, but we could tell by looking out at Tecancito and the surf going over that little bit of rocks up there, how high the waves were, whether it was worth going over there to swim. And one day I was at that beach, and I saw these tracks all over the beach, and I'm going, damn it, what idiot's in here with an ATV? And then I realized, one set of tracks, not two. These were turtle tracks. And up along the forest, there were 9 nests.
Oh.
And turtles on a regular basis went up and laid their eggs on that beach, because turtles always go back to the same beach that they were born in and lay their eggs in the same nest. Now, me, I'm still a little squeamish about scorpions and snakes. You couldn't pay me enough to walk through that forest at night. But we had a lot of guests that did, and they'd go down, they'd build a bonfire, and they'd sit and watch the stars and watch the waves, and they could watch turtles coming up to lay their eggs. And for them, that was just incredible. So this is a picture of that beach. Oops, I just lost it. Oh dear. What did I do? There. There. Up. There. Completely virgin beach. Nothing on it. Eventually there will be 3 hotels. But we had that beach for 20 years. and it's still like that. There's still no hotels on it.
In spite of the turtles?
Pardon?
I thought they were
Oh, yeah.
They're protected.
They're protected, but they can still build it. They just, I don't know. But I know that there's 3 lots, and Furniture had them for sale, and 2 of them have been sold. But 2 of them were sold when we were there, and the hotels are waiting for the 3rd lot, and they'll all build them together. Yeah. There's turtles on all those beaches. All those beaches and turtles.
So when the hotels are built, will they now own all the frontage and make it a private beach?
That's a good question. We had neighbors who backed onto that hill, and they tried to rent the federal zone, and Furniture wouldn't rent it to them because they wanted to be able to leave that federal zone for the people who bought the hotel, so that they couldn't get through that way. In theory, in Mexico, all beaches are public, so I don't know.
Grease the right bomb.
Yeah. So
once a hotel is built on the turtle nest.
they would build it. They would build it further back, but they don't build right on the beach. They would build it further back from the sand. There is a federal zone. The federal zone is, I think, 20 meters 15 meters from the high water zone. So the turtles would be laying their eggs in front of the hotel. And if that was the season, if there were turtles coming up, they wouldn't allow people onto the beach at night, and they would be guarding those nests. They do that because turtles are endangered. And Huatulco still was built, unlike Cancun, as kind of more of a natural eco resort. So they are careful about things like that.
They actually do the same thing in Florida.
Yeah.
The turtles come in, and there are people that are watching them. It's a similar kind of scenario.
Yeah. Just like I was in Central BC once when the salmon were running, and there were great big signs everywhere. It is unlawful to molest the salmon. I thought that was a good word. Right. So another change that we encountered had to do with one of our guests, because we'd always, on that door that you saw that we came out at the front entrance, when we built, we wanted to put a stained glass window, but we couldn't find anybody in Huatulco that did the kind of stained glass work that I wanted, and so we just put in a piece of textured glass. One of our guests was a stained glass artist, and it came up in conversation over breakfast, and I mentioned, I said, yeah, we wanted to put a stained glass there, but we couldn't find anybody. So he showed me his website, and the guy did really nice work. He was an interesting guy. He was born in Italy. His parents took him to Canada when he was 10 years old. He took him quite young. But when he was 10 or 12 years old, they decided to move back to Italy. So he was more Italian than Canadian. And he met a girl from Mexico in Italy who was studying Italian. And he followed her back to Tuxtla Gutierrez. So they were out visiting. And Tuxtla Gutierrez is about a 7-hour drive from Huatulco. And so he sent me some designs and I chose one. He measured it up with newspaper to get, because it wasn't like a 6 inch, like by 4 inches. And he came back about 3 months later and installed it. And this, I can get that picture out.
Oh, lovely.
Yeah.
That's cool.
Yeah, and that I looked at, that I considered to be the jewel in the crown. I just absolutely loved that window, and every day I looked at it, I just thought, thank goodness for, yeah. Now that isn't there. I think that I was always very careful not to let that door slam, but the people that bought it put in a mirrored window. Obviously something happened to the stained glass.
How big was, what were the dimensions?
It was about this tall, yeah. It was half the door, so the bottom half of the door was, but it was, yeah, about this big, and each panel was about like that. Yeah, it was quite a big piece, yeah.
Be ashamed for the break.
Yeah, it was. I don't know, if they'd asked me, I would have told him how to get hold of it. He probably could have repaired it, but
And the timeline, what was this timeline on the Turtle Beach thing, that's like 2006, 2007, and you still own the property?
yeah, we owned the property up until, I'm getting there, in my
I'm
statement.
trying to follow the timeline online.
Okay, yeah, okay. So the final change came in 2001, when we finally sold the property.
2001?
2021, thank you.
We're 2006,
Right.
2020.
Right, dyslexia. Yeah, it came in 2021 when we finally sold the property. We'd had it for sale for 12 years, but in fairness, almost none of those big properties were selling. I like to use the analogy that the real estate agents in Huatulco were kind of like students that went to the University of Hawaii. They weren't there for the academic excellence, and the real estate agents weren't there trying to get rich. They just wanted to support their lifestyle, and so they weren't working very hard. If they could sell a couple of condos, they were happy. My narrative is sprinkled with bits of history, tradition, local folk, and local folklore. It's peppered with anecdotes about our staff, about local people, and about guests. The story is about change. It's about adapting to a new environment, a new language, new culture, and a slower lifestyle. Those of you who know me will say I'm still probably a type A, but I think I'm a softer, rounder type A than I was when we came to Mexico. Thank you for that. So, this is just the outline. That's the table of contents of the book. And I have 7 copies for sale if you are interested. It's for sale on Amazon. I'm asking 200 pesos. It's for sale on Amazon in US or Canada for $9.95, or the equivalent in Canadian dollars. It's a little expensive in Mexico because you pay a lot for shipping. It's available on ebook for $5.95, and if you have Prime, it's available for free on Prime. So we've got time for questions. Yes.
I just want to say that I have stayed at your place in 2017,
Yeah,
maybe,
yeah.
give or take a year. And you were a wonderful host,
Thank
full
you.
of information, and that beach was gorgeous, Virgin Beach, I loved it, except for
It was a
red
climb.
pine
It was
and
a
there were
hike,
ants or mosquitoes or something at the top.
Yeah.
But otherwise, it was absolutely gorgeous.
Yeah.
Beautiful home.
Thank you. Thank you. Yeah.
Did you design the villa from scratch?
Yes, we worked with an architect, and we gave him 6 pages, point form, single space, and he gave us almost everything that was on the list. The only thing that we didn't get that was on our list was we wanted our bedroom on the same floor as the common area and the kitchen, and our bedroom was 1 story up. And he convinced us that really it didn't matter, because he said if you're at the point where you need to have your bedroom on the same story, you really need to sell it and move. He was right.
So what did you do? Did you have this dream and you had a chat with the architect?
Yeah, we sat down and talked with the architect, and we, like I said, we gave him 6 pages of criteria. We told him how, because we knew what we could afford to build, so we told him how big the bedroom should be, and that each room should have its own bedroom. And because of the lot that we bought, we could envision it stepping down the side of the hill and using that shape of the villa. And we wanted to use a lot of natural materials like palapa and wood, and so those were the sorts of things that we told him. And in fact, he did such a great job of making it integrate with the environment that at one point we took a picture from the hill on one side, and we had to outline it in red on our website because you couldn't see it.
And how did you get the word out so quickly that your place was available?
Well, internet, that was the only thing, that was our only, really our main method of advertising. And we were really lucky too. I mean, part of it's luck, part of it's good management, because I mean, we really looked hard for just the right spot. And we got to Huatulco at just the right time. And one of the reasons that we did this before we really felt that we could afford to do it was because we sort of expected that at some point in the future there was going to be a stampede of extranjeros making their way down to Mexico when they were retiring, and we wanted to sort of beat that crowd. And in fact, we were ahead of the curve, probably by about 10 years. But one of our guests commented that, you know, you guys really are in a unique marketing position because you're the only game in town. There was big hotels, like the big all-inclusive hotels, and there was small hotels that were run by Mexicans, and there was almost nothing in between. I think there was one other hotel was run by a Mexican American, and I was quite friendly with his daughter, called Via's Corral, that was even close to what we had. And they were, I think, a 20-foot hotel. Yeah.
Brooke, did you have any issues, or anyone around there, rainy season came and you're on a hill in the bush? Did you have issues with the rainy?
Well, we had issues with mosquitoes a little bit,
But nothing like
no,
landslides or?
no.
Okay.
The thing was, although it looked like it was on a hill and there's a lot of vegetation, and there's a lot more earth under the, on top of the stone than there is here, but everything was really rock. And so when they did the building, they would excavate right down to the rock, and then they built a trench about this wide, and they poured a slurry of cement around the trench, and then they put rebar, and so there was like rows of, it was a square, about like this, of rebar, and the rebar was like 1-inch rebar, and they tied it together, and it went all the way along the foundation, and then they put the supports. And our house was built to this was the code, and because this was a furniture development, if you built in some little village, nobody would be paying attention, but furniture was really checking these things, and it was built to withstand an earthquake of 7.5, and we did have 2 earthquakes that were 7.5 while we were there. And one of them was just out in the water in front of us, so it was a really good shake, and it was 7.5 for a full minute. Yeah. And so when we had earthquake, we had the 7.5. I was in the shower when it happened, and I'm thinking, this has been going on for a long time. Maybe I should get out. Yeah.
Did you take Spanish before you?
Yeah,
started?
I did, but not enough. I took.
Dealing with something that is not conversational.
Yeah.
Architect,
yeah.
builders.
The architect spoke English, and we really didn't have much interaction with the builders, with the Albaneals. It was just, they did
Or
what
the
you.
general contractor.
Yeah, the architect was the general contractor, and it was his crew. But I had taken a year of adult education, 2 nights a week, but it wasn't enough to form a sentence. And then we'd gone down to, we'd taken a couple of weeks when we were in Chiapas during our Magical Mystery Tour. After we found Huatulco, there was nothing for sale, and we had to wait until they put something up for sale. So rather than sitting on our duck, we went down to San Cristobal, and we studied there for about a week or 10 days. And then we went down to Guatemala, and there is this chapter in Guatemala about the book. We really studied quite a bit in Guatemala. We spent a month, but I could still barely conjugate verbs. And unfortunately, you know, I had words like vacuum. This is in the book, but I didn't have the word for a dustpan, which is recogedor. And the first maid that we had, who was a real piece of work, we'd get all the way down to the bottom room, and I was going to show her how I wanted the room done. And she'd forgotten to bring the recogedor. and I couldn't say it, so I had to go upstairs and get it and bring it down for her. And after a week or so, she was forgetting something every single day, so I was running up and down the stairs.
So you were working for her.
Yeah, and she didn't last more than about a month, and then we got somebody who was really good, and I wanted to adopt her. But no, I didn't speak enough Spanish to really do things properly. And this is a funny story that I tell about Virginia, our second maid, who was a couple of years younger than I was, but I thought that she was too old to do the job. She looked really old, and she was just a tiny little thing, and she was a really good, hard worker. But the first 6 months or so, she barely looked at us, and she just went about her business. And once in a while, there were things that I had to explain to her, and somehow we got it. But one day she came to work, and her daughter had started university. And her daughter, they teach English in high school, but they teach it so badly that they don't get anything. And her daughter was taking it in university, so she put Post-it notes around the house to learn some vocabulary. And so he just said to me, "Is it true you got a different word for this?" "Yeah." "And what about this? What is it?" And we start going through the house, and we, "Yeah, that's a saucepan, that's a frying pan, that's a plate, that's a glass." And she said, "You mean everything has a different word?" I went, "Yeah." And I don't know what she thought we were doing all this time, but just making grunts. And that changed the relationship when she realized that we were actually intelligent people.
I've seen instances where they put signs on the objects.
Yeah, that's what her daughter was doing, just with Post-it notes, so that she, yeah.
Oh, we should be
Yeah.
doing that.
You had only one staff?
We had a full-time maid, and we had a full-time gardener. When we first moved, I liked gardening, and I thought I'd do some gardening. And that lasted about 2 months and nearly killed us. The heat, you just can't do it. So we hired a gardener, and Hihinya was it. She worked 5.5 days a week. Sundays were our day, and that's one of the reasons we chose only to have 6 guest rooms and not 8, because Rick and I thought we could do 3 each. And after the first year, first of all, it was nearly killing us to do 3 each, but also we realized that you can't wear 2 hats. People that sit and have breakfast with you and tell funny stories don't want you going into the room half an hour later and seeing what slobs they are. So we hired a second maid, part-time. Yeah.
When was the last time you were in Huatulco?
December of 2021, we left.
So you haven't been back since?
No.
I was gonna say, everything's changed here in a few years.
Yeah, and things have changed there
I was
drastically.
in Huatulco when you were there.
Yeah,
Of course, we didn't know each other.
yeah, it's too bad.
But.
Yeah, things have changed drastically because Fonator had a 25-year mandate, and last year the mandate ended, and Fonator left. And everybody was sort of hoping that they would stay longer because there was still land for sale and stuff. But one of the things that's happened, I was talking to somebody just last week. When we moved there were 9 wells, so there was no water shortage. The wells were further inland near the river, and there was lots of water. The water was pumped in. We had potable water. Well, they said it was potable, but if the street had a flood from a pipe breaking and they used cheap pipe, then they fixed it and a lot of contamination got in. So we didn't drink potable water, but it was semi-potable. And we watered our lawns with the same. And that garden was a thirsty garden. And now they have 5 wells that are operating because wells keep breaking down. And the population of Huatulco is 3 times higher. A lot of condos have gone. When we were there, we rented this really basic little apartment, which is all we could afford anyway, but you couldn't get a luxury condo. There weren't any. And now there's all kinds of really luxury condos all over the place. In addition to, there was 5 homes in Huatulco when we built, and 3 under construction. And when we left, there were over 60.
I was in the travel business for several years, and the last few years, they were really cashing in on Huatulco and Zawatanay and I could see where it would develop exponentially.
Yeah, and it has sort of taken off. They also put a road in from Oaxaca, which was talked about from the time we bought land. They were talking about this road from Oaxaca that was going to cut the drive from 7 or 8 hours to 3 or 4 hours. And now they have it. And so that's what kind of changed, what will start to really change Huatulco is that road and the accessibility of people from Oaxaca.
So it's interesting on the historical background of that piece of land.
It was actually a really, one of the legends of Huatulco, and this was based on some fact, is that before the Spanish came, there was a lot of indigenous people there, and when the Spanish came, one of the reasons that it was a little easier to conquer the Zapotec mixed people in that was because they were already worshiping the symbol of the cross. And the legend is that long before, a man with flowing white hair and something white floated in on a cross, which could have been the mast of a ship. And they thought that this man was Quetzalcoatl, the winged spirit who had promised to return. And so nobody knows what happened to the man. He was probably half dead when he arrived. But they put this cross up, and they worshiped this cross. And people, there is evidence that they were trading with people, the Incas in Peru. So people came from Peru to worship this cross. And so when they came in, they conquered the people, and the people kind of became Catholic. And this was also a perfect area for shipping because it was the narrowest point in Mexico, and it was very sheltered. So the boats came from Asia, and they brought in goods like pearls and silk and spices, and they imported them across to Veracruz, and then they shipped them to Spain. So this was also a big area for pirates. And the pirates would raid Huatulco, and they sacked the town, and they burned everything to the ground. And this is where it starts to sound like the sword and the stone. The only thing left standing was the cross. Now, it might have been petrified wood by now, so who knows. But the people of Huatulco said, we can't live on this beach anymore. It's too dangerous. Those pirates keep coming in and pillaging us. So they moved to where Santa Maria Huatulco is now. And that became the real village. And so it was just really a little fishing village. And the government came in and they expropriated the land, and that was kind of controversial from all the local people. But the local people that didn't just sell their land for a goat and 3 chickens did very well, because they got each man got a piece of land and each woman got a piece of land. So if there was a couple, they got 2 pieces of land, and they got a sum of money which would be enough to build 1 house. So some people that are locals had grocery stores and little hotels and did very well, and some people didn't do well because they didn't know what money was, and it went very quickly. Yeah.
And so you sold it in 2021, and you were not a citizen then?
Yes, we became a citizen in
When you were still there?
Yeah, we became a citizen in 2013. But it was really difficult when I had to change my name, because in Mexico, if you can't just go to the bank and say, change the name on the account. You have to close the whole account and open a whole new account. So I didn't bother. I just kept using the name Brooke and used my passport instead of my card, my citizenship card in the bank. And it's the same thing with medical, because we had medical insurance. So that's why when I came to Merida, I decided just to start from scratch, because in Huatulco, a lot of people knew me as Brooke Gazer. But it was complicated because any government form had to be Heska, so I just started from scratch as Heska. Yeah.
And you sold it for a profit, let's say? I mean, when you...
Yeah, we did okay. Not quite as much as we were hoping for, but yeah, we're not unhappy about it.
All those years, 20 years ago?
It was 20 years exactly, yeah.
From when you bought the land and then you built
No,
it?
20 years from the time we moved into Villa to the time we moved out, almost within a month. Yeah.
Is it still operating?
It still is operating, and I saw their website recently. The garden doesn't look as nice. I said, Rick, come here, look, they've done the garden. And probably part of that is because the water is restricted. Yeah. But they're doing very well. They're really nice people that bought it. He was a Mexican American, and it was just, he's a beautiful rags to riches story. He lived he grew up in Jalisco, on a farm, and he had several brothers and sisters, and they couldn't even afford shoes. And he had an uncle who had a little taco restaurant somewhere in the States, and the uncle wrote to the father and said, if you can send one of your boys, we can't pay him very much, but we'll put him up and we'll feed him. And so he went to live in the States, and he worked for him for a couple of years, and as he was working for him, he thought, this isn't that hard, I could do this. And he saved every penny that he got paid until he had enough, and he went to another city, and he looked for a place to lease, went to the bank with a business plan, got a loan, and opened a little taco place. And he expanded that to 5 taco places in Nebraska and three in Jalisco. And then he became a aficionado of tequila. And he was telling me, because he had these, when they were moving in, he had like cases this high, and from here to the window of tequila, and he wanted me to know, I'm not drinking all that. But it was high-end tequila, and he said, I bring in high-end tequila, and he said, people come and eat tacos, and their bill could be over $20. Or sorry, the bill could be over $200, I'm just laughing, over $200 just drinking tequila. So he said there's a lot of money in the States in tequila right now, and he wanted to bring people down and do dinners with tequila tasting eventually. That was his long-range plan. Yeah, he was a very smart guy. Yeah.
And of course, they buy a couple of bottles to take home after they're tasted.
Probably, yeah.
More money.
Was it profitable on an ongoing basis?
Yes and no. There were months that our maid and gardener made more than we did. So especially during COVID. We just closed up. We actually closed up before everything else closed up. We started calling people and saying, I'm sorry, we're having to cancel your reservation. We just can't take the chance, because my husband had a heart condition and we were worried about him. And then when everything closed up, we just paid our staff not to come. But there were months, even there was during the 2008 crisis, just after we bought this land. We bought the place in Merida, and like 3 months later, that's when that big crash came in the United States, the housing, whatever it was. And it was a perfect storm, and I covered that in the book too. It was a perfect storm because the United States was going through a major recession, so people didn't have as much money to travel. Mexicana Airlines, which was the major carrier to us, went out of business. And the media was on steroids about how dangerous Mexico was. So we went for sometimes a week or 2 weeks without guests. And then we'd have one guest, we'd have another guest. And then when the construction was going on, that also really affected our occupancy. So we had a couple of years where we were going through a lot of money that was going out, not coming in. But at the end of the day, we were doing, when things picked up again around 2017, I think, that's when we started to do well again.
Is it considered safe there?
Yes, it's very safe. Very, very safe. Yeah.
Isn't there a Puerto Angel there?
Yeah, Puerto Angel, we almost blinked going through Puerto Angel. And we actually stayed in Puerto Angel one night, and the water there was really dirty at that time because it was during the rainy season and all the rivers went down into that beach. So we went a little further up to Mazunte. That's where we nearly blinked. We missed Mazunte, and we went back to Mazunte and went swimming, and we nearly drowned. We developed a whole new appreciation for how difficult the ocean can be. And Rick sort of coached me in, gave me a push, and I got onto shore, and he was still out there, and there was one guy standing there beside me, and I was wondering, do you think that guy might go home and save Rick? And Rick realized he had like maybe 2 breaths left, and then he remembered he swam parallel with the surf, and he was okay, because it just kept, that surf was so hard, it just kept pushing us down, and you just get up and barely get a breath, and it pushed you down again. The waves can be really, really something on the Pacific.
Was that a rip tide?
I don't know, it was a big tide,
You
yeah.
swim against
Yeah.
the
That's what it was, yeah.
And so 2021, you sold it, and how did you choose Merida?
Well, we'd already chosen Merida. We'd had this property for 12 years.
Oh, you bought it for 12 years before you chose?
Yeah, we thought maybe it'll take a couple of years to sell, but we started looking around. And you should never look at property before you're ready to buy. And I saw this, and we saw this house, and I said, you know, it was perfect. I knew exactly what I was gonna do with it. We were gonna do something similar. There was already, I think, something like 32 bed and breakfasts in Merida, so I decided that's not what I wanna do. But there was only one other place that rented apartments on a short-term basis for tourism. This was before the internet and Airbnb and all that, you know.
Well, this is, you bought it, and during those 12 years that you were hoping to sell.
Yeah, and we were losing money,
It takes you
yeah.
12 years to sell.
Yeah.
And why did it take so long? Just slow to develop Huatulco and.
Huatulco was developed and it was
Yeah,
beautiful,
I know.
but, I mean, there's still a lot of Mexicans that have never heard of Huatulco, and there's sure a lot of
Sure.
Americans and Canadians that have never heard of Huatulco. I mean, the major cities in Canada have charter flights, and that's why they do it. Canadian, and it was a bit of a paradox, because people who could afford to buy a house like this didn't need to run a bed and breakfast. And people who wanted to run a bed and breakfast couldn't afford a house like this.
That's interesting.
And Rick said, you know, we made a major blunder. We should never have marketed it as a bed and breakfast. We should have just, but the big villas just simply weren't selling. I think that in that 12 years, less than 5 houses sold. And we've got some friends that have a big house like that. They actually they were developers, and they bought 12 lots, and they built one spec house. They sold the 12 lots, but they never sold the spec house. It's still for sale. So stuff just wasn't selling, and the real estate agents there are not aggressive. Like somebody comes in and asks, I want to buy a 4-bedroom house with ocean view. They've got lots to show them,
Sure.
but they're not going out looking for people looking at that.
Yeah, but my curiosity is, during that 12 years you're trying to sell it, why did you choose Merida
Oh,
over,
okay,
you know,
yes.
because people, even to this day, when I say
Merida.
Merida, people don't even know
Okay,
it.
well,
Yeah.
we'd already seen Acapulco. We hated Acapulco.
Yeah.
I mean, we stayed anywhere from one night to a month, wherever we were looking at. And if we got into Acapulco, we left the next morning. We didn't like Puerto Vallarta. We'd been there years before, and we loved it, but we didn't like what had happened to Puerto Vallarta. We did look at things around Puerto Vallarta, but if we were going to be there for medical, we'd have to live in the city.
Sure.
So that was out of the question. Rick, with a heart condition, does better at sea level than he does in the mountains. I mean, we thought of Mexico City for like 5 minutes. I could never learn to drive there.
Breathe.
Yeah, yeah. And even places like Querétaro, which would have been lovely, they're at altitude, and he does better at sea level. So we were looking at places at sea level. And so we came to Merida, and we can handle the heat because we've been doing it for 20 years. So that's, I mean, it did get a little hotter in May and June than it ever got in Huatulco. That 40, I think 35 is as hot as it ever gets in Huatulco. And we had a nice breeze most of the time. But we were looking for a place that had good medical, that was the priority, that had some tourism, and that had, what was the third thing? Medical and tourism.
Security?
No, we didn't even think about security.
Good food, culture,
See that one?
Sea level, that was it, yeah, sea level, and we wanted to be near a beach because at that time we had a golden retriever that liked to swim. So the beach was really important to us. So, I guess I've just about used up my time. Thank you very much for coming.
Very interesting.
Oh, you know what? I did have a reading, but we don't have time.
sell your books, Brooke.
Yeah, I've got these books here if anybody wants one.
How much are they, Brooke?
200
How
pesos.
you doing?
I'm fine, how are you?
Good, good, good.
Oh,
How was your trip?
thank you.